In Japan's Sengoku period, an age of constant warfare and betrayal, one warlord became a legend, a name that struck fear and respect into the hearts of his enemies. They called him the Tiger of Kai. This is the story of Takeda Shingen, a man whose ambition and military genius nearly conquered Japan. Born in 1521, Takeda Harunobu, as he was first known, was the heir to the Takeda clan of Kai province. This wasn't a peaceful time to be born into power. Japan was fractured, a chaotic chessboard of warring clans, each vying for supremacy. From a young age, it was clear that Harunobu was different. He possessed a sharp mind for strategy and a cold, calculating ambition that would define his life. In a move that would shock the nation, at just 20 years old, he orchestrated a coup against his own father, Takeda Nobutora. Nobutora was a harsh and unpopular ruler, and Harunobu, with the support of the clan's key retainers, exiled him. It was a ruthless decision, but it was the first step in his transformation into the fearsome leader he was destined to become. He took the name Shingen and began a campaign of expansion that would last his entire life. Shingen's first major target was the neighboring province of Shinano. But Shinano wasn't a single entity. It was a patchwork of smaller, fiercely independent clans. Conquering it would be a long, brutal slog. This is where Shingen's genius truly began to shine. He didn't just rely on brute force. He used diplomacy, espionage, and psychological warfare to break his enemies before they even met on the battlefield. He would turn clans against each other, bribe key generals, and exploit every weakness he could find. One of his most famous victories during this time was the siege of Uehara. Instead of a costly direct assault, Shingen's forces used their knowledge of the terrain and a surprise night attack to overwhelm the defenders. It was a classic example of his cunning. Slowly but surely, over years of hard fighting, he subjugated the lords of Shinano, absorbing their lands and their warriors into his own growing army. And what an army it was! Shingen understood the power of a professional, loyal, and well-equipped military. At the heart of his force was the most powerful cavalry in all of Japan. He knew that mobility was key in the mountainous terrain of central Japan, and his mounted samurai could strike with devastating speed and shock value. He also cultivated a group of incredibly talented and loyal commanders, known to history as the 24 generals of the Takeda clan. Men like Yamagata Masakage, known for his fiery red armor and ferocious charges, and Baba Nobuharu, a master of defense and tactics. These were not just subordinates, they were the pillars of his military machine. Shingen's philosophy of war was famously encapsulated in his banner, the Fū-rin-ka-zan. It was inspired by Sun Tzu's art of war, and its characters stood for wind, forest, fire, and mountain. As swift as the wind, as silent as the forest, as ravaging as fire, and as immovable as the mountain. This wasn't just a cool motto. It was the doctrine that guided his every move. His army could appear as if from nowhere, strike with overwhelming force, and then hold a defensive position with unbreakable resolve. But as Shingen's power grew in Shinano, it brought him into direct conflict with another rising power to the north, a man who would become his lifelong nemesis, Uesugi Kenshin, the Dragon of Echigo. If Shingen was the calculating tiger, Kenshin was the righteous dragon. He was a devout Buddhist, a brilliant commander in his own right, and saw himself as a dispenser of justice. He believed Shingen's aggressive expansion was dishonorable and took it upon himself to stop him. Their rivalry would define an era and create one of the most legendary matchups in samurai history. The stage for their conflict was a plain called Kawana-Kajima, a strategic piece of land where the territories of the Takeda and Uesugi met. Between 1553 and 1564, the tiger and the dragon would clash here 5 times. These weren't just battles. They were epic confrontations of strategy, will, and personal honor. The most famous of these was the Fourth Battle of Kawana-Kajima in 1561. It was a brutal, bloody affair, one of the deadliest battles of the Sengoku period. Kenshin, using a brilliant and risky strategy, managed to cross the river under the cover of fog and launch a surprise attack directly on Shingen's command post. The Takeda forces were caught completely off guard. In the chaos of the battle, a legendary duel is said to have occurred. A lone samurai on horseback charged into Shingen's headquarters, cutting his way through the bodyguards. It was Uesugi Kenshin himself. He swung his sword at Shingen, who, caught without his own blade, parried the blows with his iron war fan. It was the ultimate clash of the dragon and the tiger, a moment frozen in Japanese art and folklore. Though Shingen survived, the battle was a tactical draw, with both sides suffering horrific casualties. Neither could claim a decisive victory, and their rivalry remained a stalemate. While Kenshin was his most famous rival, Shingen's ultimate ambition was much greater. He dreamed of marching on the capital, Kyoto, deposing the weak Ashikaga shogun, and becoming the supreme ruler of Japan. By the early 1570s, the stage was set for his final greatest campaign. The most significant obstacle in his path was the rapidly expanding power of Oda Nobunaga, a ruthless and innovative daimyo who was already well on his way to unifying the country. To get to Nobunaga, Shingen first had to go through Nobunaga's key ally, a young but determined daimyo named Tokugawa Ieyasu. In 1572, Shingen led his army of 25,000 elite warriors into Ieyasu's territory. Ieyasu, with a much smaller force of around 11,000, including some reinforcements from Nobunaga, decided to challenge the Takeda army at a place called Mikatagara. It was a disastrous decision. Shingen, the master strategist, feigned a retreat, luring Ieyasu's army into a perfectly laid trap. As the Tokugawa forces pursued, Shingen's army turned and unleashed a devastating cavalry charge. The Tokugawa lines shattered. It was an overwhelming defeat, a complete humiliation for Ieyasu, who barely escaped with his life. He was said to have been so terrified that he lost control of his bowels while fleeing on horseback, a detail he later had a portrait painted of, to remind himself never to make such a mistake again. The victory at Mikatagara sent shockwaves across Japan. The great Takeda Shingen had crushed the forces of Nobunaga and Tokugawa. The road to Kyoto was open. It seemed that nothing could stop the Tiger of Kai. His dream of ruling Japan was finally within reach. But fate, as it so often does, had other plans. As his army continued its advance, laying siege to Noda Castle, Shingen suddenly fell ill. The exact cause of his death is still debated by historians. Some accounts say he was wounded by a sniper's bullet during the siege. Others, more likely, suggest he succumbed to a recurring illness, possibly tuberculosis or stomach cancer. His commanders tried to keep his condition a secret, but the great warlord was fading. Realizing his time was short, he gave his final orders. He instructed his heir, Takeda Katsuyori, to keep his death a secret for 3 years, and to make peace with the Uesugi, to focus all their strength on holding their ground. In 1573, at the age of 51, Takeda Shingen, the Tiger of Kai, died. His campaign was called off, and his army retreated back to their home province, their banner of conquest lowered. Shingen's death was a pivotal moment in Japanese history. Without its brilliant leader, the Takeda clan began to crumble. His son, Katsuyori, was a brave warrior, but lacked his father's strategic genius and political skill. Just 2 years later, at the Battle of Nagashino, Katsuyori led the famed Takeda cavalry into a catastrophic trap set by Oda Nobunaga and Tokugawa Ieyasu. Nobunaga's innovative use of rotating volleys of gunfire from thousands of Ashigaru riflemen completely annihilated the charging Takeda cavalry. It was the end of an era. The Takeda clan was destroyed, and the path to unification was left wide open for Nobunaga, and eventually Tokugawa Ieyasu. Today, Takeda Shingen is remembered as one of the greatest military minds in Japanese history. He was a complex figure, a ruthless conqueror who exiled his own father, but also a skilled administrator who developed laws, managed gold mines, and built flood control systems that benefited his people. His life was a whirlwind of ambition, strategy, and conflict, a perfect embodiment of the turbulent spirit of the Sengoku period. He was the tiger who almost conquered Japan, a legend whose story continues to fascinate us hundreds of years later.